Dawn broke over the ruins like a scar opening across the sky. The city had fallen 3 days prior, but the smoke still rose from buildings that refused to stop burning, as if the stones themselves held grudges and would not release their heat until every memory of what had been was consumed. I stood at the edge of what had once been the agora, watching Spartan soldiers move through the rubble with the methodical efficiency of men who had done this many times before in many cities, and who would do it many times again. The bodies had been cleared. The men, those who had survived the initial slaughter, had been chained and marched away. The women had been gathered, sorted, assigned. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible over the sound of soldiers calling orders to each other, I heard it. The thin, desperate cry of an infant, then another and another. Babies born in the chaos of conquest, or born before and now orphaned, or born from unions that should never have happened but did anyway, because war creates its own laws and its own consequences. Sparta engraved its victories on stone. It carved the names of heroes into monuments. It told stories of warriors who stood against impossible odds, of discipline that turned men into weapons, of a society so devoted to strength that weakness itself was a crime. But it buried its shame in silence. It hid what it did not want the world to see, and no one imagines what they did to their own bastards. The children who carried Spartan blood but were never allowed to claim it. The sons and daughters born from the wombs of conquered women, bearing the features of warriors who would never acknowledge them. I am one of those children. Or rather, I was. I am old now, too old to matter to anyone, which is perhaps why I am still alive to tell this story. Sparta forgot about me the way it forgot about all of us, and in that forgetting, it gave me something it never intended. Survival long enough to speak. If you are still listening, perhaps you are one of the few who believe some truths should not remain buried. Stay, subscribe, because this is a story Sparta tried to erase, and if I do not tell it, it will be lost forever, swallowed by the same silence that swallowed the voices of my mother, my brothers, the other children who looked like me, but were never supposed to exist. My mother was from a city whose name I will not speak, not because I have forgotten it, but because naming it feels like betraying her somehow, like giving Sparta permission to claim even that small piece of her identity. She was taken after the fall, as all the women were. She was young, maybe 16, with dark hair that she wore in the traditional style of her people, braided with colored threads that signified her family's lineage. The Spartans cut those braids the day they took her. Not as punishment, simply as practicality. Long hair could harbor lice, could be grabbed in a struggle, could mark you as belonging to a culture that no longer mattered. She was brought to Sparta and assigned to the household of an officer. Not one of the great commanders whose names you might recognize from history, but a man of middling rank, competent enough to have survived multiple campaigns, ambitious enough to want more than he had been given. His name was Callias. I know this because I heard it spoken often, always with respect by those beneath him, always with a certain wary calculation by those equal to him. He had a Spartan wife, a cold woman with a face like carved marble and eyes that showed no emotion except occasionally contempt. She ran the household with military precision, and my mother, like the other captive women, learned quickly that obedience was the only path to survival. Callias came to my mother on the 12th night after her arrival. I know this because she told me years later, in one of the few moments when she allowed herself to remember aloud. She said she had been counting the days, hoping each one that passed without incident meant she might be spared, might be overlooked, might become invisible enough to escape notice. But on the 12th night, the door to the room where the captive women slept opened, and his silhouette blocked the torchlight, and he pointed at her without speaking, and she had no choice but to stand and follow. I will not tell you what happened in the room where he took her. Not because I am protecting him, he deserves no protection, but because my mother never told me the details, and I will not invent trauma for the sake of narrative. What I will tell you is that she returned hours later, and she did not speak for 3 days after that. She moved through her tasks like a ghost, present but not present, her eyes focused on something no one else could see. The other women did not ask her what had happened. They already knew, and asking would have forced her to relive what could not be changed. 3 months later, she realized she was pregnant. In a different world, this might have been a moment of joy, or at least of acceptance. But in Sparta, with a child conceived not in marriage but in the exercise of power, it was a crisis. She did not know what to do. She could not hide it. Her body would betray her eventually. She could not run. Where would she go, alone, pregnant in the heart of Spartan territory? She could not speak to Callias. He was not someone who invited conversation, especially not from captive women. So she did the only thing she could. She continued to work, to serve, to exist as quietly as possible, and hoped that when the time came, some solution would present itself, some mercy would appear, some God would intervene. No God intervened. When her pregnancy became visible, Callias's wife confronted her. Not with anger, but with cold calculation. She asked who the father was. My mother, terrified, did not answer. The wife smiled, though there was no warmth in it, and said, "You do not need to tell me, I already know. And you should understand something. That child you carry is not yours. It belongs to this household. It will be dealt with according to our laws and our needs. You have no say in the matter." My mother was moved to a different part of the household after that, a smaller room, isolated from the other women. She was given enough food to sustain herself and the growing child, but nothing more. She was not mistreated, at least not physically, but she was separated, marked as something different, something problematic. When I was born, it was in that small room, with only one other woman present, an old helot who had served the household for decades, and who delivered me with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. She cut the cord, washed me, wrapped me in rough cloth, and then she looked at my mother with an expression that might have been pity or might have been resignation. "Boy or girl?" my mother asked. "Boy," the helot said. My mother closed her eyes. I do not know if she was relieved or heartbroken, perhaps both. I was allowed to stay with her for the first year of my life. This was unusual, I learned later. Most children born to captive women in Sparta were taken immediately, assessed and dealt with according to a system that no one spoke of openly, but everyone understood. But for reasons I never fully understood, perhaps because Callias had some flicker of conscience, or because his wife had calculated that allowing my mother to keep me would make her more compliant, I was permitted to remain. My mother nursed me. She sang to me in her native language, songs I would not understand the words to until I was much older, but whose melodies I still remember. She told me stories, whispered so quietly that no one else could hear, about the city she had come from, about the family she had lost, about the world that had existed before Sparta destroyed it. But she also warned me, even as an infant, even when I could not possibly understand the words, she warned me. "You are not Spartan," she would whisper. "You will never be Spartan. No matter what you do, no matter how strong you become, no matter how much you try to prove yourself, they will never accept you, because you came from me, because you were born from conquest, because your existence is a reminder of something they do not want to acknowledge." When I was 7 years old, they came for me. It was early morning, just after dawn, when the light is thin and uncertain. 2 Spartan soldiers arrived at the household and asked for me by name, though name is perhaps too generous a word. They called me the boy born of the foreign woman. They did not ask my mother's permission. They simply took me. My mother tried to hold on to me. She wrapped her arms around me and refused to let go, and for a moment the soldiers seemed uncertain. This was not resistance in the sense of violence or rebellion. It was simply a mother unwilling to release her child. But Callias's wife appeared, and she said something to the soldiers in a low voice. And they pried my mother's hands away, and she screamed, and I screamed. And neither of our screams mattered, because within minutes I was outside the house, being led away, and my mother's voice faded behind me until I could not hear it any more. They took me to a compound on the outskirts of Sparta, a place that had no name, at least not one that was spoken aloud. It was surrounded by a wooden palisade, and inside there were several low buildings, and in the yard there were other children, dozens of them, all of us roughly the same age, all of us with similar stories, I would learn. Children born from captive women, children who carried Spartan blood from fathers who would never claim us. We were not trained as Spartan boys were trained. We were not given the education, the discipline, the honor of the agoge, but we were not released either. We existed in a liminal space, neither slave nor citizen, neither fully human nor entirely disposable. We were kept, maintained, controlled. I remember asking one of the older boys, a child maybe 2 years older than me who had been in the compound longer, what we were being kept for. "No one knows," he said. "Some think we'll be made into laborers, some think we'll be sent to the mines. Some think we'll be trained as soldiers but never given ranks or names, and some think—" He paused, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Some think they're just waiting for us to be old enough, and then they'll take us up the mountain." "What mountain?" I asked. "Taygetus," he whispered, "where they take the weak infants, where they leave them to die." I did not believe him. Or rather, I did not want to believe him. But as the years passed, I began to notice things. Children would disappear from the compound, not all at once, just 1 or 2 every few months. We would wake up, and a boy who had slept near us would be gone, his space empty, no explanation given. When we asked the guards what had happened, they would say the child had been reassigned, or sent elsewhere, or simply ignore the question. But we never saw any of them again. There were rumors among us, whispered in the dark hours before dawn when the guards were least attentive. Some said the disappeared children had been sold to distant cities where no one would recognize their mixed heritage. Some said they had been sent to work in the silver mines of Lorient, where life expectancy was measured in months. Some said they had been taken to the mountains and left there, whether to die or to somehow survive on their own. No one knew. And some said something darker, that there was a night, once a year, when all the children who had reached a certain age were gathered, and Spartan officials came, and they made selections based on criteria no one understood, and those selected were taken away and never spoken of again. I lived in fear of that night. We all did. We did not know when it would come, or how they chose, or what happened to those taken. We only knew that it had happened before, and it would happen again, and there was nothing we could do to prevent it. The night came when I was 14. I remember because I'd been counting years obsessively, marking them on a piece of wood I kept hidden, trying to create some sense of time passing, some evidence that I existed in a continuous narrative rather than simply floating in an eternal present. The guards came after dark, more of them than usual, carrying torches that turned their faces into flickering masks of shadow and light. They lined us up in the yard, all of us, every child in the compound. There must have been 50 or 60 of us by then. They made us stand in rows while older men, Spartan officials in formal robes, walked among us, examining us the way you might examine horses or slaves at market. They checked our height, our build, our teeth. They asked some of us questions, though I do not remember what the questions were. Fear has a way of erasing details, leaving only impressions, sensations, the feeling of being observed by people who saw you not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. Some of us were marked, a simple gesture, a guard touching our shoulder, and we were separated from the group. I was one of those marked. So was the boy who had whispered about Taygetus years before. So were about 20 others. We were taken from the compound that night, loaded into carts, hands bound not with rope but with iron shackles, as if we were criminals rather than children. We travelled through the darkness, and none of us spoke because speaking felt dangerous, felt like it might make whatever was happening worse. I do not know where they took us. I remember only fragments, a long journey, cold nights, being unloaded into another compound, this one more isolated, surrounded by forest rather than city. Being separated again, this time individually, each of us taken to different places. I was brought to a small building, barely more than a shed, and locked inside. There was no light except what leaked through cracks in the wood. There was no bed, no blanket, nothing but bare earth. I sat in the darkness and tried not to think about what would happen next. In the morning, an old man came. He was not dressed as a soldier. He wore simple robes, and he carried no weapon. He opened the door and looked at me with eyes that were weary and sad. "You are the son of Callias," he said. Not a question, a statement. I did not know how to respond. I had never been called that before. I had never been acknowledged as anyone's son. "He does not claim you," the old man continued. "He cannot. Spartan law does not permit it. You are proof of an inconvenient truth, that even the most disciplined warriors are still men, and men create consequences they would prefer to forget." "What will happen to me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The old man sighed. "That depends. Some of you will be sent away, given new identities in distant cities where no one knows your origins. Some will be kept here, trained for tasks that citizens cannot perform, but that the state requires. And some," he paused, "some will be taken to the mountain. It depends on what they see in you, whether you are useful, whether you are too much of a reminder." A reminder of what? That Sparta is not as pure as it claims to be, that its strength is built on things it does not want to acknowledge, that every empire has secrets, and you are one of them. He left after that, and I was alone again. I will not recount every day of the years that followed. Time loses meaning when you are property, when your existence is determined by the whims of people who do not see you as fully human. I was kept in that place, along with some of the others from the compound. We were trained, not as Spartan warriors, but as something else. Shadow soldiers, one of the guards called us once, though I do not think he meant for us to hear. We learned to fight, but we were never given armor or crests. We learned to follow orders, but we were never told what cause we served. Some of us were sent on missions, dangerous tasks that required bodies, but not names. We were expendable. If we succeeded, Sparta benefited. If we died, no one mourned. We existed in the margins of history, doing the work that needed to be done but could never be acknowledged. I survived, not because I was strong or clever, but because I was lucky, because I happened to be useful in ways others were not, because I made myself invisible when I needed to, essential when it mattered, because I learned the only lesson that mattered in that place. That survival was not about honor or courage or any of the virtues Sparta claimed to value. It was about being too valuable to discard and too unremarkable to threaten. I never saw my mother again. I do not know what happened to her, whether she lived or died, whether she was sold or simply forgotten. I like to think she survived, that she found some small measure of peace. But I do not know. And not knowing is its own kind of torture. I am old now. The Sparta I knew has faded. The empire has fractured. The warriors who once seemed invincible have been defeated by time, if not by enemies. And the secrets, the things they buried, are beginning to surface. Not in official histories, not in monuments, but in whispers, in stories told by people like me who survived long enough to speak. Sparta remembered its warriors. It carved their names into stone. It told their stories for generations, but it did not remember us. The children born in the shadows, the bastards who carried Spartan blood but were never allowed to claim it. We were erased, written out of history, denied names, identities, futures. But we existed. We suffered. We survived. And some of us are still here, old and forgotten, but still able to speak. If you are still here, if you have listened to this entire account, let the world know we existed. Let them know that behind Sparta's glory was shame. Behind its strength was cruelty. Behind its laws was a secret it tried to bury but could not destroy because some of us lived. Comment if you want their stories to be told. Subscribe so silence does not win again, because I am one voice, but there were hundreds of us, thousands across the centuries, children who should never have been born, according to Sparta, children who were born anyway, children who paid the price for wars they did not start, and victories they were never allowed to share. We were Sparta's secret, its shame, its buried truth, and I will not let that truth die with me.